Okay, could I have a motion to adopt the agenda for this evening?
So moved.
Katie, is there a second?
Second.
Chris? Any questions, conversation, additions? Nope. Okay, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, we are set for our agenda for this evening. We just have a few items on our special agenda this evening. The first is the approval of the professional learning plan. Superintendent Law.
Chair Wagner, members of the board, before you tonight is the final version of a professional learning plan. This has come through the district's new innovation process where we gathered staff input, and Dr. Ledoux will be sharing this, to address one of the pressing challenges for the district. And the current challenge that they addressed was the need for additional professional learning time. We've been gathering professional learning time throughout the school year with late starts and early dismissals. And it hasn't been enough time in one setting to accomplish the kinds of things that are coming up as required by the Legislative READ Act as one thing that's a driving force, as well as more time to really invest in some of the board goals that we have. So tonight you're going to see a proposal and a request for approval for a learning plan that the board has seen on 2 occasions. It's been vetted through a variety of audiences in the district. It's received blessings from our Teachers Association, and after approval tonight, this would be, assuming the board approves it, immediately communicated to the staff and to parents. So, Dr. Ledoux.
Thank you, Superintendent Law, Madam Chair, members of the board. I appreciate the opportunity to be here to share with you our proposal to adjust the calendar to support this pilot plan that provides our staff with additional professional learning. So based on the school board's goals and the evolving needs of students, significant adult learning needs really have been identified, and really specifically in those core areas and priorities. As Superintendent Law mentioned, there are many things driving this need. In addition to there being a high priority need to really support our teachers to do the work that we're asking, we know that we have aggressive goals set, and the work really requires us to continue to evolve in our practices. And so the focus on literacy, both looking at structured literacy as well as literacy of the content or disciplinary literacy. Certainly the READ legislation outlines extensive professional development needs, targeting first our primary teachers, our interventionists and special ed, and then subsequently all teaching staff. Additionally, we know we have new standards in ELA that we're preparing to implement, and we know that there'll be additional standard reviews in each core content area. We continue to look to move forward our MTSS processes and practices and really embed consistent Tier 1 instruction, following similar practices around the use of formative assessment, making sure we've addressed data literacy, and that we're responding to students through Tier 1 intervention and extension. And then, of course, continuing to look at how we can refine and realign our PLC practices to really make that the vehicle for our teachers to collaborate and work together to specifically address each student's learning needs. As we think about professional development, historically we've called it staff development, and there's been really an intentional shift by our district to reframe this as professional learning. We know that improving schools is really all about learning. It's about organizational learning, it's about individual leader and teacher learning, and ultimately the goal is to impact our students' learning. Additionally, educational literature is really clear that developing people requires targeted professional development as an essential element to successfully moving schools forward. We also have had strong professional learning beliefs that have been in place, and this proposal really helps us realize these beliefs, or helps us bring them to life. So really thinking about teacher effectiveness, making sure that we're thinking about best practices, for instruction that align with research, that we're supporting teachers to meet their professional obligation to continue to grow and learn and evolve as teachers. And we're making sure that we're providing a structure that allows that sustaining the learning over time. So interval learning that gives teachers time to collaborate together. And then finally, allows us really to keep in the forefront, how are we intentionally working toward our district goals and really living into those goals in our practice. Our current reality provides our teachers with 8 hours of structured staff development. We have 2 late starts and 2 early releases. In addition, of course, our principals are always looking at embedding that learning into staff meetings, into workshop week, but it ends up being small chunks of time that aren't always the best conditions for learning, specifically adult learning. But as we think about the changes and this proposal, we also needed to consider what does the state of Minnesota require of schools? So really looking at the state statute, we needed to consider that the minimum number of days is 165 in grades 1 through 11, and that there's minimum hours required for instruction at each level, with our secondary students in grades 7 through 12 really being the greatest number. As Superintendent Law mentioned, we really wanted to look at this using our high priority belief and value for innovation. And we've been working this past year on the next evolution for our innovation process, focusing that process to help us address needs outlined in our board goals or priority needs that we're trying to solve as a district. And so in order to come up with the proposals that have been shared with you, we asked the staff that work most closely with professional learning. So that's our principals, that's our staff development chairs, that's our teacher instructional coaches, our tech coaches, and then, of course, our MTA leadership, for ideas that they had about how we might think about increasing professional learning. And we shared with them the logistics, the parameters, and what the priorities were. We had 21 proposals submitted. 14 of those came from teachers, 7 came from administrators. And from those, we developed 3 proposals that we shared with you both at the April and again at the May study session. Tonight, we have a recommended proposal. And that recommended proposal really gained the greatest level of support from all of our stakeholders. We shared it with PTO, PTA leaders. We've shared it with the Teaching and Learning Advisory, with our administrative team broadly, and of course with the Minnetonka Teachers Association. And in our work with them, this is the proposal that has the most support, and our teachers are excited about how this can support them in their work. So as we look at this initial, or at this recommended proposal, you can see that the first days really don't have a student calendar change effect per se, because ideally we'd be adding a day before the start of the school year, August 22nd or 28th, and teachers would have choice of which day. Teachers who are unable to participate in that day or choose not to will have an opportunity to make that up on November 22nd, and I'll talk more about that in a minute. The second day will happen on October 23rd. This will be a no school day for K-5, but it will be an optional practice e-learning day. So we'll test our process to send work with our students, to communicate with families, and for families to see how did that go for them and what kind of challenges were they faced with, so that in the event that we have future closures due to weather-related or emergencies, that we already have a vetted process that we know can work for our youngest learners. For our grades 6 through 12, while it also will be a practice, we've had more experience and a great deal of success with e-learning, so this would be an e-learning day that was required. The next day that would be affected is November 22nd. Again, that would be the trade-out for teachers who attend a summer day not to report, and of course a no school day for our K-12 students. And any teachers who didn't participate, we'll replicate the learning for them on this day. The third day is January 2nd. This would be a no school day. And again, it's the Tuesday after winter break. And it would be full professional learning. And the final day is aligned with spring parent-teacher conferences. It's the following Monday. And again, it would be a no school day for K-5 and an e-learning day for 6-12. So we've really worked to position those days at times that might create an extended break for families and make it family-friendly, as well as on the backside of a break for our teachers so that they can gear up as they come back to work after a break and fully engage in the learning that's being offered. Some of the key features that I want to just point out is this proposal does eliminate late starts and early releases in the 23-24 school calendar. It really provides that combination of no school and e-learning days. It gives us that practice time that I talked about as it relates to preparing for unexpected closures. It allows us to offer that ongoing sustained professional learning that aligns with our district priorities, the state legislation, and helps us best meet the needs of our learners. And we'll be putting in place practices that allow teachers who need to be absent because they're sick or they have another personal need on that day to make up that learning, because it's really important that it's not optional, that we have all teachers engaged in the learning so that we can advance our work. We also want to ensure that as we think about professional learning, we always want to be modeling with our staff what we expect and what we want to see in their classrooms. So we'll be sure to align the professional learning with best practices. It won't be a day of teachers sitting in a session passively. They'll be actively engaged. There'll be times for direct instruction, but also a focus on really making sure that we're providing times to collaborate and to really work to think through and plan how they can implement that learning in their classroom and how we can build off of previous learning by sharing and working together. So with that, that is our proposal. And I'd be happy to address any questions.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ledoux. Could I please have a motion to approve the pilot calendar change for the 2023-2024 school year to support professional learning for our teachers?
So moved.
Chris?
Second.
Katie, is a second? Okay, any discussion or questions? Mike?
Thank you. Just to clarify, I had asked the last study session about direct instruction for students with IEPs that have a direct instruction stipulation in their IEP. And you said that that there would be an in-school option for those students, or at least the plan is to provide an in-school option for those students with a para support and with potentially with licensed teacher backup. Is that?
We will have individualized plans for those students, much like they would receive through special ed, delivered through e-learning, but it will be specific to their IEP or their goals. For any student, when we do an e-learning day, and in this case it'll be 6-12, school districts are required to provide an in-school option, and in that case it will be supervised and supported by staff and potentially some of our reserve teachers as well. But it will be structured and supported, but they will be following their e-learning plan for the day, because we'll need all of our Minnetonka teachers to be highly engaged in the professional learning that's happening.
Right. Okay. Thank you.
Other questions? No? Katie?
We've had the presentation a couple of times, and it's been really a collaborative process. What a great way to problem solve something that a directed goal that we want to support our teachers. And so it's really great to see all those ideas that have come forward. the groups, the various groups that have given feedback, and it just has been a really interesting and successful process. I'm excited to see how it, how it's how it works next year, and really what the feedback is from the staff for making that change for more of a full day versus those 2 hours. So it's been a really great process and a lot of work. So thank you to everybody involved and everybody who provided that feedback also.
Thank you very much.
Any other questions or comments from the board? Megan?
Comment, not question, but I'm just looking at the one-page kind of summary visual of the proposed calendar, and I just want to compliment everybody who worked on this to kind of get all the feedback that we had brought. We brought a few suggestions, but I like that there's a different code for these e-learning PLC days versus another non-school day, because it makes it pretty clear to community what the intent is with those days. Same with the addition of all the extra holidays and observances. I think it's a nice addition to that calendar. So I just wanted to thank you to everybody involved.
Yeah, definitely a collaborative effort. Thank you.
All right, anybody else? No? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the pilot calendar changes presented. All those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Opposed? All right, motion carries. Thank you
you.
very much, and thanks again to all the folks that worked on this. It was great to see the innovation supporting our board goals so well, so we really appreciate that. Okay, our next item is the approval of the fiscal year 2024 budget. Superintendent Law.
Chair Wagner, members of the board, earlier this year, Mr. Bourgeois has presented to the board the preliminary budget for the next calendar year, FY24. This reflects the latest legislative financial adjustments for school districts, as well as our local changes in tax base, et cetera. You will see tonight for final approval that plan that has to be by statute approved every year by June 30th. So Mr. Bourgeois will present for your approval tonight.
Thank you, Superintendent Law, Madam Chair, members of the board. We've reviewed all the funds in detail at prior meetings. What we've typically done in the district is focus on the general operating fund for the final approval, because we've ground our way through all the funds that kind of have their own separate revenues and separate expenditures and kind of stay balanced within them. So we're focusing on this presentation a little bit shorter than the last one, hopefully a lot shorter than the last one maybe, but at the end of the resolution is to adopt the total budget of the district. So first thing I have to also then do is recognize Ash Mooney, who's our coordinator of budget and financial systems. He's the man behind the curtain pulling the levers like the Wizard of Oz to make it all work. And he does a great job with assistance from Jess Hewlett, our coordinator of accounting and audit, and many others. But thank you, Ash. We'll get started here, and we're going to go back and actually look at a little bit of history, because to kind of learn how we got to where we are in 2024. And this is a slide that you've seen before, but there's a lot more to this slide than initially meets the eye. And this is the history of the district since 1996, when we were like all other school districts in the state, had a new set of operating or revenue generating formulas. Prior to that time, school districts could pretty much levy what they needed. There were some limitations put on in 1994 for the 1996 school year. And in that time, the district then went through a series of budget reductions or deficit spending. And for perspective, in the year 2006, that $3.2 million on the budget at that time was about a 7 to 8% cut in the budget. But I use a lot of metaphors in talking about school district finance, and one of them is that certain decisions the board make is like steering a super tanker, because it just sets the momentum in a certain direction. And prior to fiscal 7, after receiving, the district had done okay in that biennium. The legislature had passed the last time we got 4% on the funding formula for 2 years, for fiscal 6 and fiscal 7. But in fiscal 7, the districts the school board made the decision to start the immersion programs in all of our elementary schools. And that's when open enrollment appetite, I guess, from surrounding districts really took off. So we've actually been on an 18-year run of no budget reductions. And that's been made possible by revenue increases from enrollment growth and operating referendum increases. An 18-year run is, think about this, I'm a football fan, right? But that's as long a run as the Patriots had from their first Super Bowl to their last one. I mean, so it's a long time. In fiscal 06, again, I mentioned 4% and 4%, but in fiscal 9, which has happened in fiscal 7, we got a $436 bump in our operating referendum for about a $4 million increase. In fiscal 17, which was voted on in November of 2015, the last time we had an operating referendum election, we got $340 per pupil for about $4 million. And then in 2020, from that same referendum, we did the Tonka two-step, one of the first districts in the state to use that approach, just asking for what we needed when we needed it. We actually picked up another $340, but because of pupil growth, that's about $4.3 million. But all that revenue is actually rippling through, going forward into history, into the future, I guess. And it's continuing to sustain us. That last FY20 dollar amount, we've kind of grown into it over the last 3 years. It's kind of a rule of thumb that you get an operating referendum chunk of money and you roll into it kind of over time. And so we basically have rolled into that over the last 3 years. So again, the other thing is during that time from 08 to fiscal 2022, we averaged 15 years of average 223 pupil enrollment growth, which provided additional revenue. So this is another metaphor I have for the district on our 18-year run. We've been flying high, doing a lot of great things for students. And every school district there's 4 engines that have been allowing us to fly high. The state aid revenue formulas, everybody gets those formulas. Every school district does. Local levy revenue formulas, every school district gets those. But then the 2 things that really kind of separated us and let us fly at a little higher altitude has been the open enrollment growth average and the operating referendum cap increases. One other thing I'll talk about a little bit later is on that state aid formula revenue, though, is our jet engine is a lot smaller than almost every other school districts in the state. We do not get nearly as much state aid per pupil compared to every other district in the state. We are the lowest in the metro area, out of 57 districts in the 7-county metro, and out of 329 students, we're down at 324, 329, way in the basement in terms of state aid per pupil. So there's some significant disparities in state aid. And so we've actually relied on our operating referendum and enrollment growth to basically for survival. So we're going to have to work with the legislature. We've been working, but need to make a little more progress in terms of trying to get them to help us out in that regard, maybe eliminate or close those disparities just a little bit. But those minimal operating overhead increases in admin and support mean that all of the additional revenue for operating referendum, student increases, basically it goes to the classroom instruction for the benefit of all students. And during that time, we created this list of facilities, 128 classrooms, 49 specialists, small group rooms, gyms, a couple of shops. We've expanded all the kitchens, some building purchases and renovations in the new Bandage building, which is a 20% increase in square footage to house a 45% increase in students. So that's about $98 million in facility improvements out of existing resources. So to do that, we've done several dozen bond restructurings to create payment capacity out of our existing revenue streams of operating capital and lease levy rather than having to ask the voters for a tax increase. But that's been to the benefit of every student. We started out with at the start of this run, we started out at 7,737 students in 2007. That's the year, again, before we started the immersion programs and really kind of jump-started interest in the district. 11,200 students for 2024 are budgeted, which is 45% growth. Back in 2007, we had 514 full-time equivalent teachers, which is at a ratio of 1 per 15.04 students. Now, teachers are classroom teachers. They're teachers who are working with small groups. There's teachers who are teaching band and chorus, FIED, all those type of instructional areas. We also have teachers count as media center teachers, nurses, and counselors are all in that. But we've been able, through the revenue generation that we've had, to have 838.25 teachers in this year's proposed budget. That's 1 per 13.36 students. So that little gap of about 1.7 sounds like a small amount, but it's a 63% growth in teachers. And if you take that gap, it's actually about a 12% increase in teachers to lower that ratio from 15.04 down to 13.36. So that actually equates to about almost 94 additional teacher FTEs, and at our average FY24 budgeted teacher compensation of $115,000. That's an added investment in our students of almost $10,800,000 that is going directly into our students that we wouldn't have had if we hadn't gone on this growth path. So just on our operating referendum, it's the 8th year with additional operating referendum funds authorized by that November 3rd levy. I mentioned the 2 steps. It had received 72% of approval. We have authority to run that referendum, that levy for 2 more levies this fall in 23 and next fall in 24. Our operating referendum inflation increase for FY24 actually is about 18%, or 12.18% at $229 per student, which is it's a 2-year makeup over original estimates because of the spike in inflation we had over the last 2 calendar years. Thankfully, it's coming down. In the last May, CPI for the Minneapolis-St. Paul Bloomington metropolitan statistical area, actually core inflation is running lower than the national average, and in this statistical area, it's at 2.1%. So it's heading in the right direction. But we had this makeup from the prior years. But under current statutes, we don't have further capacity to increase operating referendum other than the annual inflation increase, which usually runs around $600,000. We've been lobbying the legislature since started talking to Dr. Peterson back in 2017, and he took forward to the board for the 2018 legislative session for a plank in our legislative levy. I'm sorry, not levy. Our legislative agenda to have increase in the operating referendum be something that would be available to all districts. We haven't had any success so far, but we've got to keep pounding away and keep asking our local legislators to kind of go to bat for us. Operating fund revenue from per pupil formulas in FY24, the biggest amount with the 4% increase for FY24 is $7,138 in general fund revenue. There's location equity revenue of $724. That dollar amount has not changed since it was implemented in 2014. Actually, it was implemented in 2 steps, 2014 and 2019, but no inflation increase on that. Referendum revenue has the inflation increase, and it went up $229 up to the $2,110. QComp revenue has been set at $260 for about 16 years, so that's been flat. But at least that's on a per pupil basis, so as pupils have risen in the district, we got additional revenue to put into our staff for the alternative teacher compensation for the additional work that they do as part of that program. Equity revenue of $69 for us has been declining a little bit every year. It's based on various demographics in the district. Equity or transition revenue is $1.55. That's been in place since that funding change back in 1996, and it's been at $1.55 since then. Gate revenue at 13 and Safe Schools revenue of 36. Those have been fixed since 2014. So we got total general fund revenue per student in K6 is up $10,352 in both. That's a combination of state and local on those major funding areas. And then general fund revenue per each 712 student is, you take them times 1.2, the head count, times 1.2, so about $12,423 per 712 student. We pick up another $229 for operating capital, which also has been fairly stagnant since 2014 for K6, and $275 for 712, and then lease levy has been fixed since 2014 at $212 and $254 for 712. So we'll get into larger dollar chunks here. Overall revenues for our general operating fund of $161 million, which is $11 million increase over FY23 amended budget. Expenses of $158,957,000, which is $9.3 million increase over the FY23 amended budget, with a budgeted net surplus right now is of just a little over $2 million, just almost $2.1 million. The general operating fund is actually about 64% of our total expenditures for the district overall. So those other funds, nutrition services, primarily debt service funds, self-insurance fund, community ed fund, those are the biggest ones. There's about 5 other smaller ones. Those make up the remainder to get us to our total $249 million on a district-wide basis that we will be expending in 2024. Some of the key assumptions: 11,100 in-person K-12 enrollment for October 1st, and then we're looking at trying to hit 100 students in Tonka online. comprehensive, or we still put in there or in person, because if we would fall below 100 in Tonka Online, we've got 11,200 budgeted, so we'd have to try to make that up. But we assume the 4% increase in basic revenue per pupil, and then operating referendum at 2110, 838 teacher FTEs, and then pretty much flat with FY23. And then we're assuming we're in negotiations with our teachers unit, and that is our largest group. You'll see some numbers a little later about how large they are in terms of the overall budget, which they should be. That's why we're in business, to teach students. But we're assuming a 4% total compensation package for them for this year and also next year, and then a 3% after that, which kind of returns it to the more normal assumption before inflation hit a couple years ago. And then our average teacher salary, mentioned just a little over $115,000, and average new hire salary of a little over $91,000. So it's a good profession to go into. It's a noble profession. We need more people going into that profession. So if you know anybody interested, please give them a boost in the right direction. Okay, so our adopted general fund operating fund revenue, our general education revenue, that's at 700. Well, that's those funding formulas for the most part that are listed on that list. $87,553,000. Categorical revenue is basically primarily other state aid. Actually, almost all state aid. The biggest chunk of that is about $21 million in special education. You have miscellaneous revenue, which is various fees. Interest earnings is a big chunk of that, of $4.2 million. Federal of $3 million. That's kind of going down to more normal levels. It had been elevated in prior years because of some COVID one-time type of funding that's gradually being used up and phased out. Local optional revenue, that's at $724 at $8.9 million. And then the operating referendum of $28,059,527. So you can see in terms of like our operating referendum revenue, how that big orange slice is such an important piece of funding for us. Because since we're actually relatively low compared to other districts on the general education revenue side, our slice in blue there is smaller than theirs. So we make up for that by having our operating referendum revenue. So it's not extra for us. That's basically existential money that we need to have to basically spend about the median out of the 329 school districts in the state. So on a percentage basis, general ed revenue about 55%. That's the big, the big chunk. Categorical 18.1, miscellaneous 2.6, Fed 1.9. Local optional revenue of 5.6, and at operating referendum of 17.4. So our operating fund expenditures, salaries and benefits in total are $139 million out of the total $158 million, about 88% altogether. Purchase services is $7 million. That includes things like utilities and things like that. We'll go through those lists a little bit later on another slide. Supplies 4.9, transportation 7.1, and then a transfer to our art center fund of $650,000, tiny sliver of green there. But this is broken down a little bit further. So our teacher salaries and benefits are $104,354,000. All other salaries and benefits are about $34.8 million. Then we have purchase services, again, supplies, transportation, transfers, all the same. On a percentage basis, salaries and benefits overall, almost 88% of our budget. Purchase services, 4.41, supplies, 3.1%. Transportation, 4.2, which is actually up a little bit. It typically had been around 4, but we had inflationary increases in our low bidder, which we'll refer to a little later, and then our transfer at 0.41. But then breaking that down a little bit further, the primary focus of our entity is to teach students. And so teachers are about 66% of our total budget. And then other salaries are about 22%. And then you see purchase services, supplies, transportation, and transfers, again, the same. So our budget is projected on the left, and we always provide a 5-year outlook, which is conservatively estimated, because you try to estimate revenues conservatively, don't get too out of whack, and you try to, not necessarily worst case on expenditures, but you try to do reasonable on expenditures based on past history and past percentages. So on the left-hand side, you see $161 million in revenues and just under $159 million in expenditures, and we're at about $2 million for the adopted budget. For FY25, with the various assumptions mentioned before, I got a few more down below. We're looking at right now about a $3.8 million projected deficit. And then because we're looking at 2% funding formula for FY25, by the way, not a 4% on the basic formula, 4% on that basic formula would bring us up about another $275 per student, which would be close to $3 million. But the legislature decided not to do that and put money in other areas. FY26, again, we're starting to assume that we're going back to 2% because the statutory revenue for that basic revenue is 2%. And then we have inflation estimates from the state for our operating referendum, which are our second biggest chunk of revenue. So we have work to do. We're not there yet in terms of for FY25 and onward, but we're going to keep working at it, and if we're Minnetonka, we'll be successful because that's what we do. K-12 enrollment, again, at 11,100 and 100 online. The state funding of basic revenue, 4%, $275, and then 2% in FY25 thereafter. You can see that our largest referendum increase that we had for this year is very helpful to us at $229. It's about $2.957 million ongoing, and there was another almost $2.2 million from the prior year, because that year was underestimated. The state does the estimates for us, and we use that in our levy, and the state underestimated because inflation came on so fast, so we picked up some one-time money there. But our normal increase is about between $40 and $60, depending on what normal CPI changes. And then transportation, our low bid came in at 19.88% for FY24, although we had a really good contract before that for 4 years. So, I mean, we were at 2.75 the last couple of years, and inflation was actually already edging up above that. So we were winners on that side of it, but they caught up on this first year, and they're estimating higher going out. But this is the low proposal that we got in a proposal process. But we are up a little bit in that area. And in maintenance and operation costs, for the Vantage Momentum building, we increased them by 1 FTE for 3/4 of the year, and we're going to then transfer people over there to clean the building in the evenings. So we're going to have one person working during the day and a couple people transferred over from the high school at night. We looked at it and we figured we can make that work. Supplies, basically all supplies and electricity were increased at 1% in this 5-year projection, and electricity and natural gas, we're assuming 3% increases annually, because there's going to be upward pressure on those, according to our customer representatives at Excel and Centerpoint. So this is kind of what it looks like. It's a little hard to read small numbers, but I'm going to point you to the bottom line. We're looking at a total for FY22 of $25,065,000 as our total fund balance. As our unassigned fund balance, which is 15.8% of expenditures. So still a very solid year for FY24, and we're not underwater, for the next couple of years, and we're going to, make sure that doesn't happen and improve on that too. So just a couple more slides here on the categories, just talking a little bit more. Resident pupils, 55.9 million, almost 56 million. Open enroll for general ed revenue. Open enroll brings in about 31.6 million. Special ed, categorical revenue is 20.6 million. Q-comp is just under 3 million. Equity revenue of 855,000. And then we've got about a dozen other various categorical revenues that are about 4.7 million. 4.2 million investment income is budgeted at 1.5%. We keep rolling. We've got a ladder of investment maturities that go out no more than 12 months, and they just roll over, so we can always every month pull some back if we need it. But we have a sufficient cash balance, so we're making our money work for us and bringing in additional revenue that way. Federal revenue, 1.9%, and that's mainly title programs based on grant letters, and there's some carryovers from FY23. Voter-approved referendum, 17.4%. Again, 2,110 per adjusted pupil unit. At 229, it's actually 5 times the normal rate of increase because of inflation. And then we had the $3 million ongoing increase. That'll continue forward. 2.1 million is one time. Local optional revenue, again, there you see it. So, and at the bottom, I make the note. At the time, actually, I didn't adjust this down. The latest stuff had us at 331. We were 307 out of 331. That's actually still FY23, but the FY21 numbers. FY22 is numbers that just came out, and we are at 324 out of 329 this year, and a year from now, we're going to be at 325 out of 329, based on the latest runs from the state for what we're getting this year. Salaries and benefits, again, 87.5%. Purchase services include utilities, 1.9 million. That sounds like a lot of money, but it's basically about a dollar per square foot. So I don't know what you pay for utilities at home, but my utilities tend to run a little bit more than a dollar per square foot when you throw them all in. So even though my spouse tells me to turn the heat up in the wintertime. Maintenance repairs, 1.3 million, again, on about almost 1.9 million square feet. We're spending 70 cents on just kind of day-to-day repairs of keeping our buildings going. $745,000 of property and liability insurance. Special ed care and treatment tuitions budget at $511,000. Professional services of all types, $2.5 million. Supplies, instructional supplies are about $2 million. Textbooks, we have $759,000 budgeted in the general fund, and there's another $853,000 in capital projects. And our maintenance supplies, so basically all the cleaning supplies, all the paper supplies, $197,000. So, in transportation, we run 50 bus routes for K-12 on 3 tiers, and 23 special education routes. So the 19.88% increase from the low proposer basically brought up our transportation by itself by about $1 million a year. And then we have Vantage Momentum shuttle routes budgeted in there. Most of our students are going to have to ride by shuttle for $350,000, and you see our transfer. So summary, FY24 is going to be another solid year. It's our 18th consecutive year without a budget reduction process, and we are a unicorn in the state of Minnesota. There's no other district that has been able to do anything close to that. We have work to do for 25 and following years. Our future major sources of funding increase for 25 beyond, as of now, are the 2 engines, state aid and local levy, both controlled by formulas set at the legislature. Here's where I got it right on this one. I updated this slide. Minnetonka is the least amount of state aid per pupil for the 57 county metro area schools, and we're in the bottom 10 for state aid out of 329 local school districts. So our challenge is to continue to deliver excellence utilizing the resources we have. So this budget is prepared to do that, and our staff is prepared to do that. And with that, I'm glad to answer any questions.
Thank you very much, Mr. Bourgeois and team. Can I have a motion that the School Board of Minnetonka Independent School District 276 does hereby adopt the fiscal year 2024 budget as presented in the summary of budgets, all governmental fund types in accordance with governmental accounting board standards, including projected revenues and other sources of $243,698,621 for all funds, projected expenditures and other uses of $249,110,515 for all funds, and a projected fund balance at the end of fiscal year 2024 of $69,267,826 for all funds.
So moved.
Katie, is there a second?
Second.
Megan? All right. Questions for Mr. Bourgeois? I know we've gone over the budget quite a bit and had a few study sessions on it as well. So, Megan?
I had a question come up in the community recently, and I think it would be useful for the public to kind of just hear, why do we fall so far down that list of all the school districts? You know, if there are 300 and something school districts, why is it that we fall in that bottom 10%?
A lot of the state funding formulas are done based on, there's a lot of dollars into, one particular is called compensatory revenue. It's based on demographics, primarily poverty levels. So, and it's important for us to help those districts that have higher levels of poverty than our district does. So in terms of, that's why when we're lobbying, we're just asking to be able to make up a little bit of it, not that whole thing. But because we recognize that. But it's because of the funding formulas that the state sets and what they put towards districts with certain demographics.
Thanks, Megan. Any other questions or comments from Mr. Bourgeois? No? Okay, it's been moved and seconded that we approve the fiscal year 2024 budget. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? All right, we have a budget.
Thank you.
Thank you. Could I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
So moved.
Second.
Chris? Katie?
Second.
Second. All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? All right, could I have a motion to adjourn to study session?
So moved.
Katie, second?
Second.
Megan? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Opposed? All right, we will adjourn to study session.